What happens when we die? Nobody knows the answer to this question, surely. We're all going to ask ourselves this question at some point in our lives because it's fundamental to the human condition. And it's surely a big question. Do we just stop or do we go on in some way? And we may bring to this question our religious beliefs that we may have developed as adults or that may have been drummed into us from childhood. Or science may condition our thinking on this question. Lots of different reasons why we would think about it in many, many different ways. And I'm sure there's as many different views on the subject in this room as there are people in the room. But this man, Richard Dawkins, the professor of the history of science at Oxford University, or at least so he was until recently, he knows the answer to what happens to us when we die. Because he was asked this question, how do you, talk about a leading question, how do you prepare for death in a world where there isn't a God? And he replies, you prepare for it by facing up to the truth, which is that life is what we have, and so we had better live our life to the full. I can't object to that. I totally agree. We should live this magnificent gift of life to the full. But then he says, we'd better live our life to the full while we have it because there is nothing after it. And what I want to know is, how does Richard Dawkins know that? What science is that based on? What experiment, what weighing or measuring, counting, what has Dawkins done that he knows there is nothing after death? Has he died? Been there, found nothing, explored nothing, come back, reported on it? No, he hasn't. And actually what Dawkins is doing here, he is expressing his own, I would say very narrow, very limited religious belief. This is a religious belief that there is no life after death. It's an act of faith. There is no evidence for that belief. It is not a scientific fact. It's just his point of view. But because he's this esteemed professor who wrote The Selfish Gene, for goodness sake, background in genetics, people tend to buy this and say, oh gosh, yes, Dawkins says there's no life after death, and so there must be no life after death. Well, really, how do we know that, you know? What is this thing called death? Is this widely used legal definition, complete cessation of brain function as evidenced by absence of brainwave activity on an electroencephalogram? Well, I would say we are not our brains. We are our consciousness. You know, we're not our knees either, or our elbows, or our shoulders. What we are, what all of us, every one of us in this room is a spark of light, a spark of consciousness. We are our consciousness. And yes, certainly the brain is involved in consciousness in some vital way, but it's unclear exactly how. And this was the first area that I got into trouble with TED for my brief TED talk, which was on their website for a couple of weeks before they took it off. And I couldn't initially understand why they'd taken it off, but it later became clear that there is a faction of scientists who advised TED who belong to what is called the materialist reductionist tendency, that they believe that all phenomena can be reduced to matter, that there is nothing outside the material realm, effectively nothing that can't be weighed, measured, or counted. And to suggest that consciousness might in some way be non-local to the brain, cannot be reduced to the brain, cannot be localized to the brain, is a kind of act of heresy from the point of view of this faction of scientists, whose number is Richard Dawkins. Now, there's the question, does the brain make consciousness the way a generator makes electricity? That is the view of the reductionist tendency in science, that all our consciousness is, actually they call it an epiphenomenon of brain activity. It's actually a kind of accident that we have consciousness at all. Because from their point of view, what our brains are there to do is to help us, it's all about survival of the fittest. It's about Darwinian competition. And our brains have evolved to enable us to be incredible survivors in this material realm. And as an accidental byproduct of this, we've got this annoying thing called consciousness. And therefore, since our brains make our consciousness, it follows, if you hold that point of view, that when our brains are dead, flatline on the ECG, consciousness is gone. There's nothing left. It's over. Our story is over. We are just meat. We are reduced to matter. And there is nothing more to us, and it's over. If you hold that point of view, you cannot possibly believe in life after death. How could there be life after death? How could the consciousness survive death when your brain is dead? Doesn't make sense. And such things as near-death experiences, or indeed other issues that suggest non-local character of consciousness, like out-of-body experiences, telepathy, all such things must be fantasies. There can be no reality to them from the reductionist point of view. But there's another possibility if we're in this realm of analogies, which is that the relationship of consciousness to the brain might be more like the relationship of the TV signal to the TV set. And again, I got into trouble with Ted even for suggesting this, and for saying, and I stick by this, that there is nothing in neuroscience that rules this out. See, the materialist scientist will say, I know your brain makes your consciousness, because if I damage this or that area of your brain, this or that area of your consciousness will blink out. It will be gone. Therefore, that proves that your brain made that bit of your consciousness. But isn't that true with the TV analogy too? If you damage the TV screen, the picture won't be quite so good, will it? But the TV signal will still be there. The signal will still be perfect. And there's nothing that I'm aware of in neuroscience that rules out this possibility, that the brain is actually a transceiver of consciousness rather than a generator of consciousness. The brain is the interface between a non-material and a material realm through which consciousness manifests on this plane. And I mean, this is broadly the view of all spiritual traditions. So I think any reasonable person should be willing to admit that what we're looking at here is a 50-50 shot. You know, we don't know. We just don't know. We live after death, we don't live after death, 50-50. And then we have all this other stuff, you know, the ghosts, the spirits, the near-death experience. What about reincarnation? What about Ian Stevens' work at the University of Virginia, 15 years, trying to disprove reincarnation? At the end of the day, he has to conclude the only way he can explain the evidence is that reincarnation occurs. Well, reincarnation can't occur if your brain makes consciousness. It can if your brain is manifesting consciousness temporarily, if you're wearing this body, this brain, like a suit of clothes. None of this anomalous data is explained by the mainstream paradigm. And I think if we take that anomalous data into account, then suddenly the balance shifts just a little bit from 50-50. I think it becomes like 51-49, you know, if we're reasonable, in favor of some kind of conscious survival of death rather than the end when we are reduced to meat. At any rate, if we want to know what happens after death, the very last people we should discuss this with are materialist scientists, because they say, quite simply, nothing happens after death. End of story, there's nothing more to discuss. I think it's interesting to look at the views of wise ancient civilizations like the ancient Egyptians. The ancient Egyptians, after all, put their best minds to work for 3,000 years on the mystery of life after death. They didn't put their best minds to work on making computers or soap powder or cars. They put their best minds to work on what happens to us when we die. And they came to very definite and specific conclusions, which they expressed in the most amazing and beautiful symbolic art, which touches the soul to this day.